Hey everyone, thank you for joining me for a real quick YouTube video discussion here at Retro Geek Gaming. We like to talk about all stuff that's retro, geek, and of course gaming related. You're welcome to put your thoughts on this subject or anything that we talk about in comments down below as usual. And of course you can feel free to like and subscribe to the channel as I try to upload stuff um, at least 3 times a week. It really depends upon what there is to talk about news-wise and of course my busyness with work and everything like that. So I'm trying to do what I can to get in there for you as best as I can. But I do want to talk about something interesting. I had this idea come to my head, and I know it's going to sound weird because people are going to say, "What are you talking about?" But I like the idea because I talked about this with the Switch before, and we've seen it on the Switch how we've had some really good quality games come from this process. Um, I like the idea of setting up for cloud gaming, but not necessarily like you think. Like you still would physically download the game or physically own the game, but the idea of more or less is using the cloud to compute stuff. As an example, we have the DNS technology or the FSP technology, whatever it is that takes stuff at a lower image and upscales it to a higher image, right? So what I'm thinking about this is that that can be used to our advantage in a way to where like, hey, here's a 1080 image, here's a 720p image. So something like a new Switch or even a next gen Xbox, whatever machine you want to tout out there, PlayStation, Steam, whatever, it doesn't have to have that image natively running at 4K. Instead, it could just upscale it. It could be a 1080p image running at 60 frames per second, or even 120 frames per second, because again, the machine is then not using nearly as much processing to go and make sure that the image is running at a certain frame rate, or it's using all of its compute power to make sure that the game is running at a certain frame rate. I mean to say, and it's instead using that SSD storage. It's using the extra processing that it has to go and make sure that that image is in 4K. Does that make sense? I think that would be great technology. I think that if we did something like that for games, I really do think that it's going to be the kind of thing that is the next step. Because let's face it, we are getting beefier hardware. But as we get beefier hardware, we get more expensive hardware. And that might be something where we have to start compromising. And what I mean by compromising is that we're either going to have to accept as consumers that we're not going to get nearly as powerful machines as we would like, or we're going to have to accept the fact that we will get the powerful machines that we want, but it's going to be very costly. I mean, after all, we already had a lot of backlash from the PS3 with its cost back in the day. And the PS4 was like $400, and I think the PS5 is $500. So if we continue this scale and we get up to near $1,000 machines, will we want to buy a PlayStation? Will we want to buy an Xbox? Especially when those games come through Game Pass to PC? Will we want to spend... I mean, there's already people that they're already kind of like tucking at their shirts and kind of, gulping real hard and sweating at the idea of there being a close to $500 Nintendo machine. So, if you can imagine that, then just imagine how much cheaper we can have it. To where we can just simply get a small SSD in there to make sure that the game runs at 60 frames per second smooth, or 120 frames per second real smooth. Even though to me, I never really noticed the difference between 30 frames a second and 60 frames a second. I have seen it, so I know that there is a difference. I've seen it in performance mode, but 120 frames per second, I mean to say, I don't know if I've ever seen much of a difference in it. But then again, I don't have a TV that supports it right now, so maybe when I get one that does support 120 frames a second, I'll notice it, and I'll be really grateful for it. So correct me if I'm wrong about how much of a difference there is, because there might be. But I also think that it will be beneficial, because then the machines don't have to be as cheap, or as expensive, I mean to say. They can be rather cheap. We can keep it at around $400 to $500 roughly. And we can just make sure that it's, fit to the brim as best as we can with the latest technology that it can. And then the machine is just simply upscaling. It's using cloud technology. It's using, you know, FSR, whatever it is, the one that I can never think of for the life of me for some reason. But we can use this upscaling technology. And it can be proprietary, or you can go through NVIDIA or, you know, Intel or whoever you want to have make the chip to upscales it. So then we essentially have games that can run at 720p, so the machine is not being squeezed that much for power, or even 1080p, depending on what you can do. And then it's upscaled to 1330p, 1440p, 4K, 8K, whatever the highest you can get it to support. And then you can just focus on making sure that the game is running the best that it can. So that way you're not having to choose between performance or graphics. You can get both. Now, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below, because I don't know that much about that sort of technology. But that seems like it's a good way to go. That seems like that is a real good way to make sure that we keep these gaming consoles and even gaming PCs in the future down at a low cost for like entry-level consumers. And then for those people that want to go the extra mile and they do want to beef up their computer because they have a 120-inch curved monitor and they have the latest graphics chip and all that stuff, they can make it go to 240 frames a second. They can make it go to 8K or whatever. But for the entry-level cost, you can still keep it relatively cheap, or even for a next-gen Switch, you can keep it relatively low to where you can just simply worry more about whatever. You know, you can worry about, again, 1080p image, 30 frames a second on the machine. When it's docked, maybe it does 4K at 120 frames a second. Just as an example. You can focus more on making sure that the frame rate runs good, because at the end of the day, I think that's all people care about. I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think people care more about performance. Because especially on a tablet of that size, like the Switch, it's not that big of a deal if it's a 4K image. You're not really going to see it in something that's that small. So a 1080 image is just fine. But when it's docked on a 4K TV, you want to see 4K. You want it to be upscaled as best as it can by filling in all those spare pixels to make it look the absolute best that it can. But am I crazy? Put your thoughts in the comments down below. Love to hear what you guys have to think about this. If I'm onto something, or if I'm just completely off the field on this. Because, look, I know that there's people that they prefer hardware. I prefer my hardware to just be like that. And if you're a PC gamer and that's what you like to do, then that's what you like to do. But I'm just thinking of the regular, everyday consumer that can't necessarily afford $1,000 gaming computer, or doesn't want to plop down $600 or $700 as these game consoles continue to get more costly, of a way to keep costs low but still improve gaming, to still improve this technology to where the games can still run smooth and can still look good without having us feel like, oh, we're being held back by this console, we're being held back by this console. Because let's face it, some games still look like they are supposed to be PS4 or PS3 games. Some games still look like 360 games. And I remember this was an issue even with the Xbox One when it first came out, about games that ran at like 900p. That shouldn't be a problem in the next gen. It shouldn't even be a problem this gen, really. But that's all I got for you today, guys. I appreciate you watching as usual. And if you do have anything in the future you want me to talk about, you're welcome to share it in the comments down below. I'll read the article, I'll look into it, and maybe I'll talk about it in the future. But I do appreciate you guys watching as usual. Have yourself a great week, and maybe I'll see you on Wednesday. Have a good one.